also called copy editing errors. And I have not had a book out in 5 years that there isn't some copy editing situation. And it just makes me go nuts, and there's nothing I can do about it. But I can assure you that when I get a proof, I mark every single solitary thing on there. And I have my husband with a magnifying glass, and I have several other people reading the proof, trying to catch even a space that's off. And then it goes back to the publisher, and their graphics person is supposed to do all those corrections. And I have a theory that sometimes they're using one graphics person on 10 books, and they want all these books to go out like that. And so that person just simply cannot do all of your corrections. So that just gives you some insight. So I gave you a little sheet that tells you that Jerome Stern said this comment that I thought was really important, because writing is always, we don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg. And I use that a lot because there are certain people that will say to you, oh, if you're writing a book, you have to have a clear outline. Well, I usually recommend an outline because I can't write a book without an outline, but my outlines are my contents, my chapter. So I do the table of contents, and I'll put a possible working title for that chapter, which may never end up being. A colleague of mine emailed me one time and said, well, I think your book is reading all right, but your chapter titles are horrible. And I thought, well, who reads those? I mean, we have to now be clever with our chapter titles. The pressure is on. And so I emailed her back and said, actually, I was thinking that this book would not even have the word chapter. It would just have 1, 2, 3, 4. Have you not seen books like that lately? They don't even say the word chapter. So it becomes up to you whether you want the pressure of having titles. So in developing this book, I wanted to start off with this guy going to Vietnam. And I was writing away, trying to organize it to a Band of Brothers nonfiction. And I kept having this one person that I thought, this is going to be so confusing and nobody will ever understand it. I'm going to write this just like I write some of those oral history essays. And I started out that way. And then I had the typical problems that people have. Well, what is this character's name going to be? And so I knew I wanted it short, nothing shorter than Al, A-L, and it's easy for students to remember. I was trying to focus on students who were in college and would be between 19 and 22 years old. And then my husband was in the hospital, and he had a really nice-looking young resident female, and I wanted the guy's last name to be Italian because my last name's Salsi, and that's Italian, and I thought that would be some really good flavor to add to this character. And her last name was Lupo. She was Dr. Lupo. And I looked at the name, and I said, that's the last name of my character. And so from then on, the name of the character became Al Lupo. I have friends that drive up and down neighborhood streets and do all kinds. Look at street signs. They get a lot of names off of street signs. Jim Young, that illustrated the Jack Tales, and we have a great new children's picture book coming out that he illustrated in beautiful paintings, lives close to where I live, and the side of his house is a nut bush. And so I had an officer that was particularly batty in the book, and so I named him Lieutenant Nutbush. And so that name just came to mind while I'm driving over to Jim Young's house one night. Plus, I've heard of people whose last name is Nutbush, right? I don't know if you have, but I certainly have, and it just really seemed to fit this character. So sometimes when the character, by the way, is absolutely real. And I actually have relatives of people that the book is dedicated to that email me and tell me they recognize their relatives in the book, which to me is a huge compliment because they'll say, I know that character is my brother because that's exactly the way he sounds. And indeed, in fact, that character is based on that woman's brother. And the officer in charge in the book is based on my husband's officer in charge, who is the biggest, he is so funny. He just slays me. And we're so lucky in our life that we were reunited with my husband's boat officer, who went on to become a captain in the Navy from being a lowly lieutenant in Vietnam. And he turns out to be a huge character. And so I'm thinking, how am I going to handle this guy's character? Because I got my husband to call and tell him that I wanted to come and interview him personally so I could get to know him. And he told me a couple really wacky things. But it was not until one day, about 8:30 in the morning, I was hanging out in the bedroom and the phone rang, and my husband came up and said, "You'll never believe this, that's Tom Holland on the telephone." And I went, "Okay, why would he be calling me?" And he said, "You know what? I want to ask you a question, but I don't want to get your husband in trouble." And I said, "Well, just shoot." He said, "Well, did he tell you about the time that we took Pussy a Go-Go out on our boat?" And I said, "What?" He said, "Did I tell you about the time that we took Pussy a Go-Go out on the boat?" And I said, "Well, you're going to have to tell me about it now." So he went into the story about how they had a show on a barge that was lashed to the shore, and they had all these swift boats pulled up, and these Australian girls who wore go-go boots, right? In the 60s, they wore go-go boots, and they pranced go-go, and they had a little three-piece band or whatever with them, and they got out and danced and sang like you would think the Supremes would do, except these were Australian girls. And so his officer, all the guys are back on the boat being good little boys, and the officer comes up and says, "Hey guys, you want to take these girls want to go for a spin." And so they have to follow the officer, and they take the girls out in the South China Sea off the coast of South Vietnam, and they just went out, and they were going to take them to the Sanctuary, which is a hospital ship, and they knew that they could all get breakfast on the hospital ship, and the girls could cheer up the patients. And then they got a radio call that they better get back in now, because the girls were supposed to have dinner after the show with the commander in the area. But the girls, of course, being very young, I mean, you're having to put suppose all this detail, suppose it's 3 of your 18 to 20-year-old students who were dressed up in Pussy a Go-Go. Do you think they want to go out on a boat with a couple of nice-looking Navy guys and have some excitement, or do they want to go with the old geek who's the commander? And so, being a free will and them not being in the U.S. Navy, they went with where they wanted to go. So that was the main decision that turned this book into a fiction, because I could do a great deal with it. So my time is so short here, and so how do I change those slides? Huh?
Right.
Space bar.
So that's the cover of the book. And so I did not ever intend to have a prologue. It is not the convention in writing right now that you will have something that says prologue. So a lot of fantasy writers love to do prologues, and so I've been to a lot of cons where they tell the fantasy writers, "Stop it with the prologues." The publishers hate prologues, the editors hate prologues. So I prologue the first 4 chapters because I had to have a sensible setup. Why did I have to have a sensible setup? As a fiction writer, you can jump your book anywhere you want it to jump within the story. And again, I keep saying flashbacks. You can jump it into the biggest scene of action and then flash back while the guy's wounded in the hospital if you want to. But I wanted to relate to high school students who were seniors studying American history, just in case an American history teacher would use this book, because this book is very exciting and it's really great for young men. Do we all know that young men over the age of 14 do not particularly read? I think the statistic is over the age of 12. One of the reasons J.K. Rowling did Harry Potter and not Harriet Potter is what? So boys would read it. They knew girls would read about boys, but boys won't read about girls. Like Ella Enchanted, which is a middle grade book, is a wonderfully written book, but if it had been Elliot Enchanted instead of Ella, the readership would have probably quadrupled. So, interesting thing. So this just sets up the adventure that this guy is going to do something. And the interesting thing that I tried to do with it that didn't come to me immediately, but came to me from going to conventions, you want to join organizations where they have editors and agents who do presentations, just like We're teachers doing presentations to each other, but if you're interested in writing military, join the Military Writers Association of America. If you're interested in children, you have to join SCBWI, Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. The hot market now is Christian. If you think you can do faith-based books, the Christian Writers Association of America, I think, has one of the biggest conventions of any writing genre. And I have a friend recently, and I was telling, Golda writes wonderful young adult novels, and if she could write something faith-based where the girls are faced with something that's evil, but they don't do it, that's considered a Christian book now. Are you familiar with the Gossip Girls? I met the publisher, the editor of the Gossip Girls, and she said that she didn't care how naughty the Gossip Girls got. If somebody could deliver her something that would sell 10 million books, she would jump on it again. So when the Gossip Girls were having their roll in the hay and they were only 15 and 16 years old, selling millions and millions of books and girls buying them even though their parents disapproved, they had a Christian turn on it. And one of my friends got a book deal about a year ago that they paid her $125,000 advance to produce 5 Gossip Girl kind of books that are Christian. And that's probably pretty unheard of in the industry, and it shows you if you have a gleam of an idea and you get it at the right place at the right time. In fact, she is a writer of romance, and romance is racy now. It's practically I guess it comes under erotica almost now. And so in order for her to take that contract, she has to write under 2 names. It's one of the first times I've known that there's like a requirement that she write under another name. So anyway, so you go to these conferences and it tells you this has to jump off the page and it has to really bring the book up. What's happening? So I started off with a whatever it was. This is 45 revisions later. 45 revisions later, the first page. The pace of the book has 400 hours in pace because it's a war book for boys, and the voice of the book has to be pum, 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 pum in order to keep young men interested. The problem I have with the book is there's not enough profanity in it. But I had to keep the profanity light because I have a colleague who is the principal of a Christian school, and she was saying that she would, a Catholic school at that she would not even have a book in her library that had 1 word of profanity in it. So I thought, well, maybe the public schools will put 5 or 6 words of profanity in their library. So I had to be very, very light with it. So it actually opens up. Wake up, Al. Read this. It's important. My mother stood beside my bed holding a letter. I pulled a pillow over my head, hoping she'd go away. We lost the game the night before. Bummer. Hard to take a 13-14 loss, even for a freshman bench warmer. It's almost noon. Time to get up. To please her, I opened the envelope and glanced at the first line. Report for pre-induction physical. I dropped back on the bed and let the letter float across the blanket to the hardwood floor. A draft notice. Nothing worse can happen. So not only does it snap the book, it defines the moment, and we as adults know something definitely worse can happen because we find out that he's going to eventually go to war.